We built 48,000 miles of highway to connect America. What we didn't realize is that we also built the perfect hunting ground for murder. This is Interstate, highly deadly. This episode discusses real murders, violence, and sexual assault. Listener discretion is advised. By the time America realized the highways had changed murder, it was already too late. You didn't need a rig to hunt across state lines. Sometimes all it took was a car and a man people trusted. Paul John Knowles understood that before most people even had language for it. He was handsome in that 1970s cigarette machine kind of way, the kind of face that could talk its way past your instincts and straight into your passenger seat, your motel room, your house, your blind spot. One journalist who met him later said he looked like a cross between Robert Redford and Ryan O'Neal, which is deeply unfair to Robert Redford, but you get the idea. They called him the Casanova killer, which sounds like a made-for-TV movie in 1989, but the nickname stuck because charm was part of the weapon. Not the whole weapon, not even the worst part, just the wrapper. Underneath it was a drifter, burglar, escapee, and spree killer who moved through the country fast and violently in 1974, crossing state lines and leaving investigators with bodies that did not immediately look connected. Authorities later linked him to at least 18 murders, while Knowles himself claimed more, as many as 35, though not every confession was verified. And that is what makes him belong in Interstate, highly deadly. He was not boxed into one town, one victim type, one routine, or one neat little pattern investigators could map with pushpins and pride. Men, women, older victims, younger victims, strangers, brief encounters, forced entries, roadside movement, stolen cars. The case sprawled across multiple states in a way that felt less like one contained homicide investigation and more like the country itself had developed a leak. This was 1974, a more mobile America, a more anonymous America, and a country still emotionally addicted to the dumb idea that danger looked dangerous. But Knowles did not look like danger. He looked like somebody's ex-boyfriend, somebody's bad decision, somebody at a bar who knew exactly how long to hold eye contact before you mistook attention for safety. That's the creepy part. Not that he seemed monstrous. It's that for a moment he seemed normal. Before Knowles became a coast-to-coast nightmare with good hair, he was already broken in ways that were not subtle, just unfinished. He was born in Orlando in 1946, and the version of his early life that keeps surfacing is instability, foster placements, and trouble that started young and did not magically correct itself because somebody gave him a second chance and a firm talking to. By 19, he had already been convicted of kidnapping a police officer, and over the next several years, he moved in and out of jail often enough that incarceration stopped looking like a turning point and started looking like part of the furniture. Even later, he reportedly told a psychiatrist, "I'm a criminal, and I've been a criminal since I was a little kid," which is about as close to a mission statement as you can get without printing business cards. With Knowles, the murders did not appear out of nowhere like some dramatic thunderclap from a clear sky. The violence sat on top of a longer pattern: theft, manipulation, aggression, arrests, prison time, and a personality that could shift from smooth to vicious depending on what he needed from the room. His brother later described him as basically a small-time crook, the kind of guy you imagine stealing cars and busting windows, not becoming one of the most chaotic killers of the 1970s. And then there was the charm, which people love to romanticize after the fact because America has a weird historical habit of treating handsome male predators like they are damaged rock stars instead of what they actually are. Knowles was repeatedly described as attractive, polite, and disarming. That contrast helped create the Casanova killer label. But the name almost undersells how ugly the reality was. He was not seductive in some dark fairy tale way. He was a user. Charm was not romance. It was access. The most bizarre, almost redemption chapter came right before everything detonated. While serving time in Florida State Prison, Knowles began corresponding with a divorced woman in San Francisco named Angela Kovich. The connection started after he saw her name in the Pen Pal column of an astrology magazine. They became engaged. She helped pay for legal counsel, and when he got out, he flew to California expecting a fresh start, or at least his own version of one. Instead, she ended the relationship, later saying he projected an aura of fear that terrified her. He claimed he killed 3 people in San Francisco that same night, though those murders were never verified. What is verified is this. He returned to Jacksonville, got into a fight, stabbed a bartender, landed back in jail, and then escaped by picking the lock on his cell in July 1974. So before the spree had a body count, before the nickname, before the headlines, the pattern was already there in plain sight. Grievance, rejection, rage, opportunism, and a man who did not need much to tip from menace into catastrophe. He was 28 years old when the killing spree officially started. Old enough to know exactly what he was, young enough to still wear danger. It was a style choice. On July 26, 1974, after escaping custody in Jacksonville, Florida, he did not start out hitchhiking. He broke into the home of 65-year-old retired teacher Alice Henrietta Curtis, bound and gagged her, ransacked the house, and then stole her car. Curtis died from being gagged. That is the first known killing generally tied to the spree. That detail matters because it strips away a little of the outlaw cosplay people sometimes project onto men like him. He did not begin this chapter of his life as some dusty anti-hero on the shoulder of the highway thumbing for a ride under a big American sky. He started as what he was, a man who walked into an older woman's house and treated her life like an obstacle between himself and a getaway vehicle. There is nothing sexy about that. Nothing rebellious either. It is not James Dean. It is not rebel without a cause. It is more like consequences, decency, the fact that other people exist, because once you get past the cheekbones and the media nickname, that is what is left. He is scary precisely because he does not read as ugly at first glance. He sounds like the kind of man a lot of women in the 1970s, and frankly now, might have mistaken for wounded instead of dangerous. A little feral, a little intense, good-looking enough to make people override their own discomfort. That is why Knowles is a terrifying killer to highlight in this series, and why he feels different from the trucker cases. With some predators, the danger is built into the setting. The rig is intimidating. The truck stop is lonely. The whole atmosphere tells you to keep your head on a swivel. But a man like Knowles brought the threat in wearing a human face that people were trained to trust. He is the correction to the comforting lie that women only need to fear men who look obviously wrong. Robert Ben Rhodes, whom I covered in the first episode of this series, for me is a true horror story due to his torture chamber in his truck cab, but this guy is just as scary. And his first known murder tells you a lot about him if you are paying attention. He forced himself into her world, restrained her, robbed her, and took what he needed to keep moving. The common denominator was not sex appeal, it was entitlement. He behaved like other people's bodies, cars, homes, and lives were inventory, and that makes the Casanova killer label feel a little cheap, honestly. It is memorable, sure. It sells. It gives true crime TV something glossy to slap on a lower third graphic. But it also risks flattering him, which he did not earn. Still, the rapper matters, because the rapper is how he kept getting in. Not always literally into houses, though sometimes that too, but into the split second where people make decisions. Do I trust him? Do I help him? Do I let him come with me? Do I stay in the car? Do I tell myself I am overreacting? Men like Knowles live in that gap. They feed on the lag between instinct and explanation. Most women know that gap intimately. It is the half second where you think something is off and then immediately start editing yourself because he is smiling or attractive or polite enough, or because you do not want to look rude, paranoid, dramatic, bitchy, whatever word women get trained with to override self-protection. Knowles did not invent that dynamic. He just used it like a crowbar. After Alice Curtis, whatever illusion of a neat pattern you might want to impose on Knowles starts falling apart almost immediately. This is where the case gets uglier and harder to hold in your head, because he does not settle into one victim type, one method, or one setting that lets you comfort yourself with a rule. He uses whatever is in front of him. He does not hunt like a man with a ritual. He hunts like a man with an appetite and no internal breaks. That is scarier. Ritual at least gives the illusion of order. Knowles feels like chaos in boots. Within days, he was already moving through Florida using the stolen car he had taken from her house. August 2nd, investigators say he met Marjorie Howie, 49, in Atlantic Beach, Florida. She was later found strangled in her apartment, and her television had been taken. That detail is so grubby it almost tells you more about him than the headline does. Just murder and theft, side by side, like the inside of his head had no wall between violence and everyday taking. A person, a car, a TV, a set of keys. To him, it all seems to blur into available property. Then, on August 23rd, the violence shifts again. In Musella, Georgia, he forced his way into the home of Kathy Sue Pierce, 24, and strangled her with a telephone cord, while leaving her 3-year-old son physically unharmed. That one matters because it strips away any lazy theory that he was only targeting women he found attractive, only attacking in social situations, or only operating through charm. Sometimes there was just a body in a house and a killer who had decided that whoever lived there had lost the coin toss. What is extremely odd is that he stole nothing, and there is no evidence of rape either, so all we know is that he just killed a young mother with no apparent motive. What a piece of shit. It is not that there was no personality to the crimes. There was. The personality was him. Volatile, entitled, improvisational. And then the map jerks north. On September 3rd in Ohio, William Bates, 32, was reportedly seen at Scott's Inn, a roadside pub near Lima, with a red-headed man investigators later connected to Knowles. Bates vanished. Near the bar, police found the car stolen from Alice Curtis abandoned and Bates's own car missing. That is one of the clearest examples of how Knowles used vehicles almost like stepping stones. Not because the cars were the point, but because they were the easiest way to convert one victim into access to the next place. When Bates's body was later found in the woods, he had been strangled. So now you have Jacksonville to Atlantic Beach to Musella to Lima, and each stop makes the case less coherent. And once he has Bates's car, the geography goes wide and strange in a way that feels almost obscene. On September 18th, authorities say Knowles, now driving that vehicle, bound and killed 2 campers, Emmett Alexander Johnson, 62, and Lois Mildred Johnson, 59, at a rest stop near Ely, Nevada. That image is nightmare fuel all by itself, not because it is flashy, because it is ordinary. A rest stop, campers, a couple in their late 50s and early 60s, the kind of people who probably thought they were just passing through, just sleeping, just doing what Americans had been taught was normal in a country built for motion. And then he arrives. No real pattern in age, no real pattern in relationship, just his decision that they exist for his use. A few days later, the trail bends south again. Eben Charlene Hicks, 42, was reported missing on September 22nd. Her body was later found near a rest stop outside Seguin, Texas, and reports tied to the case say she had been raped and strangled. Her vehicle was found at the rest stop. Again, you can see how he uses cars and people interchangeably, almost transactionally. He does not just move in cars, he takes them, he abandons them, he turns one victim into a route to the next victim. It is predation with a logistics problem, and he keeps solving that problem with human beings. The victims are not separate from the travel, they are how the travel happens. Then comes one of the most unsettling wrinkles in the whole spree. Anne Jean Dawson, 49, a beautician Knowles appears to have met in Birmingham, Alabama, on September 23rd. Accounts differ on exactly how willingly she went with him, but the reporting says she paid the expenses while they traveled together. Sit with that for a second. This is where he becomes really frightening in the way that messes with your nervous system, because now the line between abduction, coercion, manipulation, and false intimacy starts to smear. He could frighten people, he could overpower them, but he could also create enough confusion for someone to remain near him, at least for a time, while danger was already in the car. Knowles later claimed he killed Dawson on September 29th and threw her body into the Mississippi River. Her remains were found in 1977 in Mississippi by 2 squirrel hunters. By October 16th, the violence veers again to Marlborough, Connecticut, where Karen Wine, 35, and her 16-year-old daughter, Dawn Marie Wine, were both bound, raped, and strangled during a break-in. Only a tape recorder was reported missing. 2 days later, on October 18th, Doris Hosey, 53, was shot to death with her husband's rifle. By now, it is random in the sense that his own impulses seem to decide in the moment what shape the violence will take. That makes him harder to narrate and easier to fear. You cannot solve him with one tidy sentence. And that is where the fear really lives, not just in the body count, not just in the miles, in the fact that he keeps changing shape without changing essence. The scale of it is what makes Knowles feel less like one murderer and more like a tear in the fabric. From July 26, 1974, when Alice Curtis was killed in Jacksonville, Florida, to October 18, 1974, when Doris Hosey was murdered, you are looking at roughly 84 days. In that stretch, the confirmed or widely attributed trail in the public record runs through at least 7 states: Florida, Georgia, Ohio, Nevada, Texas, Alabama, and Connecticut, and spans well over 5,000 travel miles if you simply trace the route from Jacksonville to Atlantic Beach to Musella to Lima to Ely to Birmingham to Marlborough. That is a conservative map read, not even counting local driving, detours, dead ends, or any unverified movements in between. He is also tied in that span to at least 3 stolen vehicles or vehicle transfers in the best documented public timeline. Alice Curtis's car, then William Bates's car, and later Eben Hicks's vehicle. So how do you get from a retired teacher dying during a home invasion to raping and murdering a mother and daughter? The blunt answer is you do not become that in 84 days. You reveal it. What changes across this spree is not that Paul John Knowles suddenly invents evil in real time. What changes is that whatever limits once kept his violence compartmentalized, prison walls, short bursts of crime, temporary consequences needing to fake normal life, are gone. That is the terrifying part. There is no clean ideological motive here, no manifesto, no grand revenge fantasy you can point to and say, there, that's what flipped the switch. His crimes look more like appetite broadening in public. At first, the victim is an obstacle to a robbery and escape. Then the victim becomes a target, then a convenience, then a source of transport, then a captive audience, then a sexual object, then a pair, then a family. The violence expands because nothing inside him is telling it to stop. And honestly, that may be why he unnerves me so much. Just vacancy, grievance, and appetite. It ended the way this whole case felt: fast, ugly, and a little unreal. By mid-November 1974, Paul John Knowles had been killing for just under 4 months. Publicly, the country still did not fully understand what it was looking at. Investigators in different places were dealing with different bodies, different victim types, different methods, and different local facts. But Knowles himself had started recording audio-taped confessions and mailing them to a Florida lawyer, which later helped authorities connect a spree that had looked scattered in real time. If you thought this could not get any stranger, it is about to. He met the journalist Sandy Fox on November 8, 1974 in Atlanta. They met in a hotel bar, and they spent the next couple of days together before parting on November 10, 1974. She was British and, of course, at this time had no idea he was a murderer and rapist. Fox later said he struck her as handsome and charming at first, so this points to just how disarming he could be since he was attractive. She traveled with him briefly without realizing who he was. He tried to have sex with her but was unable to perform. That detail gets repeated a lot because it cuts against the Casanova image. What makes the story darker is what happened immediately after. On November 11th, Knowles picked up Susan McKenzie, described as an acquaintance of Fox, and allegedly demanded sex from her at gunpoint. She escaped and alerted police. When officers tried to catch him, he pulled a sawed-off shotgun and got away. So the Fox episode was not some harmless pause in the spree. It sat right next to more predatory violence. The last stretch before capture is where the whole thing turns into a fever dream. On November 14th in West Palm Beach, Florida, he invaded the home of Beverly Mabee and abducted her sister, Barbara Abel, stealing their car and holding Barbara captive into the next day in Fort Pierce. She survived. That matters because suddenly you have a living witness inside a spree that otherwise often feels like a series of disappearing doors. Then, on the morning of November 16th, Florida Highway Patrol Trooper Charles Eugene Campbell recognized the stolen vehicle near Perry, Florida. Knowles overpowered him, took his pistol, commandeered the patrol car, then used the siren to stop another driver, James Meyer, a 29-year-old businessman. He forced both men into the next stage of the nightmare, drove them into Pulaski County, Georgia, handcuffed them to a tree, and shot them both in the head. Again, what a grade A piece of shit. The escalation is not neat, but it is clear. By November, Knowles was operating with the kind of swollen confidence that comes from getting away with too much for too long. The chase that followed was chaotic and almost cinematic in the worst possible way. After the murders of Campbell and Meyer, Knowles became involved in a pursuit with Henry County Sheriff's Deputy Charles Hancock. He crashed through a police roadblock in Henry County, Georgia, injuring Officer Jerry Key when the stolen car hit a patrol unit. Then he bailed out and ran on foot, firing at officers as he went. What followed was a messy manhunt with dogs, officers from multiple agencies, and helicopters. During the chase, Chief Detective Philip Howard shot Knowles in the foot. Even that did not finish it. He kept moving. And then the ending takes a left turn into something almost absurdly American. He was not finally cornered by some elite tactical unit in a dramatic last stand. He was stopped on November 17, 1974, by a 27-year-old Vietnam veteran and hospital maintenance worker named David Clark, who happened to be out hunting with a shotgun. Clark had driven through a roadblock near his home without knowing the full story, went to check on his livestock, and spotted a disheveled man emerging from the woods with a shotgun. Knowles told him he had been in a car wreck. Clark put it together fast, got his own shotgun, pointed it at him, and made him drop the weapon. According to Clark, Knowles then asked for water and, more tellingly, asked him to tell police not to hurt him because he was afraid they would shoot him on sight. Clark held him at gunpoint until Henry County investigators arrived and cuffed him. That detail sticks. After months of treating other people's lives like disposable objects, Knowles was suddenly very interested in the value of his own, and maybe that should not surprise anyone. Predators like this are often not brave in any noble sense. They are aggressive, opportunistic, grandiose, and used to controlling the scene. Once the control evaporates, a lot of the swagger goes with it. Clark later said Knowles seemed scared and compliant when he captured him. Just a hunted man in the woods, torn up by briars, trying not to die. But even after capture, the case did not resolve in any clean, satisfying way. Knowles was charged in a limited number of murders, not because the others did not matter, but because prosecutors were still building cases while authorities tried to untangle his confessions and movements. He appeared before a judge. He was interrogated repeatedly. Investigators discovered more about the taped confessions he had mailed out. He also never made it to trial, which means there was never going to be a single public courtroom moment where the whole thing got laid out, cross-examined, and pinned down. The ending we got was stranger and less complete than that. On December 18, 1974, exactly 1 month after his capture, Knowles was being transported down Interstate 20 by Douglas County Sheriff Earl Lee and Georgia Agent Ronnie Angel. They were taking him to Henry County, where, according to the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, he had said he dumped the handgun taken from Trooper Campbell. The official account says Knowles, seated in the back in restraints, had managed to free one hand by picking the handcuff lock with a paperclip. The Georgia agent said he grabbed Lee's handgun, discharged it through the holster during the struggle, and while Lee fought to control both the gun and the car, Angel fired 3 shots into Knowles' chest, killing him instantly. The vehicle careened off I-20 near the Lee Road exit during the altercation. That is the official ending, but it did not land without skepticism. Knowles' lawyer, Sheldon Yavitz, publicly questioned the escape story at the time, essentially asking how a man in chains was supposed to make a meaningful break for it. Later reporting adds another detail that makes the whole thing feel sloppier than it needed to be. Instead of a standard squad car with a steel partition, Sheriff Lee was reportedly driving his personal car. So even if the official account is true, the setup sounds dangerously lax for transporting a man accused of a multi-state murder spree. This is exactly the kind of ending that leaves the door cracked for doubt, resentment, or conspiracy-minded retelling. Knowles died at 28, never stood trial, never had to sit in one courtroom and hear the names of all the people tied to him, and never had to live long enough for the full moral weight of the case to settle publicly on his shoulders. The audio tapes that helped connect parts of the spree were later reported by the state of Georgia as having been destroyed after a flood in the federal courthouse in Macon, which adds one more bitter little note to the ending. Even the paper trail did not fully survive him. So how did it end? Not with justice in the clean sense, not with a trial, not with some final confession on the stand. It ended on a Georgia highway, inside a moving car, with a killer still trying to seize one more weapon, one more chance, one more piece of control. And honestly, that fits, because Paul John Knowles did not leave behind a story with elegant lines. The ugliest part may be that death spared him the one thing he denied everyone else: time. So how does psychology explain a man like Knowles? Not with one neat answer. And not, as far as the public record shows, with some clearly documented head injury that suddenly turned him into a killer. The sources on Knowles lean much harder toward early instability, foster placements, chronic criminal behavior, manipulation, and escalating violence than toward one proven neurological event that explains everything. Psychology would more likely look at traits associated with psychopathy and severe antisocial behavior: superficial charm, deceit, lack of remorse, poor behavioral controls, impulsivity, callousness, and using other people as objects instead of people. A review of psychopathy describes that cluster pretty clearly, and neuroscience work ties psychopathy to traits like shallow emotion, lack of shame, and profound deficits in empathy and moral concern. Psychology does not say men like this are clueless or out of touch with reality, usually the opposite. They often know exactly what other people feel. They just do not care in the normal human way. That is why the charm matters. The smile is not warmth. it is strategy. So why is the media still more obsessed with Ted Bundy than Paul Knowles, even though Knowles tore across more states in a shorter burst, killed men and women, targeted couples, young mothers, a mother and daughter, and even a cop? Part of it is body pattern. Bundy's murders were easier for the culture to package into a single, horrifying narrative. Young women, college-age victims, repeated sexual violence, and a predator who looked clean-cut enough to break people's mental picture of what a killer was supposed to look like. Knowles was terrifying, but Bundy was marketable in a way that media knows how to sell. One face, one type, one myth, one monster with a story arc people could follow. Knowles is harder to romanticize into a neat headline because he does not stay in one box. Psychology helps explain the rest. Attractive offenders benefit from the halo effect. People wrongly assume that someone who looks appealing is also more trustworthy, intelligent, and socially valuable. Research on the attractiveness halo effect shows that good-looking people are consistently judged more favorably on traits that have nothing to do with their actual character. Bundy fit that bias almost perfectly. He was easier for the public to project onto, easier for the media to frame as the charming monster, and easier for audiences to obsess over. There is also a storytelling issue. Bundy became the ultimate cautionary tale, the handsome, educated-seeming man who used casts, charm, and fake vulnerability to get close to women. That storyline plugs directly into fear, fascination, and the cultural script of the man who did not look dangerous. Knowles should fit that too, honestly, but his victims were more varied and his violence less narratively clean, so the culture never built the same singular myth around him. So Casanova Killer was not earned in any admirable sense. People later also repeated that he could be persuasive, likable, and manipulative in person, which fed the label. If you found this story compelling, follow Deadly Truths with Becca on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube, wherever you listen or watch, and share the episode with someone who loves true crime history. And remember, the past isn't dead. It's just walking the shoulder after dark.